I'm with the Red Cross as a volunteer recruiter, the state of Maine, and also Portsmouth, New Hampshire. But Erica and I work together, and this is a joint process, but I am your MC today. So let me just, for those of you who aren't well acquainted with Teams, let me just say that you probably, if you wiggle your mouse, a little bar will come up, and that bar shows to the left the camera on off, the mute and unmute, and probably during the presentation you'll want to have that clicked. The next one shows how I share my screen, and the other two that are of interest, the little hand is a raised hand. If you want to say something, please, you can hit that and we'll get you. And then the most important one of all is the one that looks like a little comment box in a cartoon, and that is a place for you to make comments along the way. If you have questions that you want to pose as you think of them, you can click on that and it won't disturb anybody. You just write your comment and then we'll pick them up at the end. So let's see here. I want to be sure that I'm getting my presentation and not the faces of the crowd, which is lovely, but not what I had in mind. So let me see here. There we go. So you've been seeing our friendly little person here who clearly was the benefit of Red Cross comfort at some point in time. I want to just welcome you today and thank you for being here. Our goals today are fairly straightforward, and I think it'll play out very easily to understand. We're going to talk a little bit about what is true about the Red Cross in terms of mission and principles. We're going to do an overview of what proves to be a big season for us, and you'll hear more about that. We'll discuss the opportunities that exist for volunteers helping around that season that we're going to talk about. We'll introduce you to some of our favorite colleagues that are near and dear to this process of disaster response. And if all goes well, we hope we'll get you onward with a volunteer opportunity with us. So I see a hand raised. Do you want to say something right now, Mr. Bloom? I think we have to unmute you. Up.
That icon bar is directly over the bottom of the slide. How can I move that icon bar out of the way so I can see the valuable material?
Yep, that's a good question. Typically, you can just click near a face, like on someone's profile, and then just don't touch your mouse again, and you should be able to make it still. And I have to go back to my sharing. Let's see here. Okay, so let's see. Today you're going to hear from me. Already you are. You're going to hear from Erica, who's been the voice you heard earlier on as we got started. You'll be hearing from our very own James Segerson, who is a man of many things, disaster. Erica, can you tell me why I keep losing my presentation?
I'm not sure, Paula. If you want to try and share it again, if other folks can try to request sharing access. So if you are clicking the share button on your icons in the front, if you could just refrain from doing that for the presentation, we should be able to move forward, but I think that might be the issue, Paula.
Okay, so it's that little button right there. Leave that one to me, okay? Okay, so I was talking about James. We also have, I think we'll have John Kepler with us. He's one of our very seasoned volunteers who will talk about his role in disaster services. We also have Terry Jarvis, who's been a wonderful help to us with her medical expertise. And I think we even have Ashley St. Louis, who is a wonderful, here it goes again. A wonderful person on the staff. She was once a volunteer, but now she is critical to our disaster work. She is our ace go-to. Okay, Erica?
Sure. So I know we have folks from all different backgrounds with us today. So some of you might be familiar with the Red Cross and others not so much. So we just wanted to start out with a little bit of the basics before we jump into talking about our sheltering opportunities. So first, the mission of the American Red Cross. The mission of the American Red Cross is to prevent and alleviate human suffering. And this is something that we really could not accomplish without the generosity of our donors and our volunteers. So you'll see the mission and all of the work that our organization does, and that includes but isn't limited to collecting units of life-saving blood, responding to local and national emergencies, teaching the public life-saving skills and first aid, providing emergency communications, and much more. And as our paid and volunteer staff work to support this mission, we are guided by 7 fundamental principles that I'll share on the next slide. And those include humanity, impartiality, neutrality, independence, voluntary service, unity, and universality. To sum up these principles that guide our work, our goal is really to provide our services through bringing assistance to those who need it and providing those services without discrimination. We don't pick sides, but rather help all in need of our services without any sort of judgment, keeping our doors open to all through that process. And we rely heavily on our volunteers to help provide much of our service, as 90 to 94% of our workforce is volunteer-based. So volunteers are really essential to allowing us to deliver our mission. So with that little bit of background about the organization, we are going to hop into the predictions for this year's hurricane and wildfire season with James, so that you can step in and make a difference with us.
All right, thanks, Erica, and good afternoon, everyone. As Erica said, my name is James Segerson. I'm the Regional Disaster Officer for the Northern New England region of the American Red Cross. So I oversee our disaster cycle services programs for Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. And really appreciate you all taking the time to learn a bit more about what we do and how you can become involved today. I've been a part of several national relief operations myself, from Hurricanes Harvey, Maria, and Florence, and many in between. So I know firsthand the need that there is to be prepared for these larger responses, and that's why we're here today. And we want to lay the foundation for why we're making this extra effort, this year. Every year, hurricane season comes around, wildfire season comes around. But this year, there's an extra sort of element of complexity and potential for need, because we're having to respond to these storms or potential storms, with the additional challenge of COVID-19. So we're really making an extra effort. And on top of that, what you're seeing on the screen are the NOAA being the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, their forecast for how many storms we could see this Atlantic hurricane season. What you're seeing are actually their initial projections, so 13 to 19 named storms and so forth. Last week, NOAA actually updated their projections, and we're looking at the potential for even more storms than we originally thought. Their new projections are 19 to 25 named storms, 7 to 11 hurricanes, and still 3 to 6 major hurricanes. And to put that in context, each of those categories is about double the average number of storms we see in any given year. If any of you follow the weather closely, you're probably aware that right now we've got Tropical Depression 11 out in the Atlantic. That's forecast to become Tropical Storm Josephine later today. And if it does, it will be the earliest J storm by about 10 days on record ever, since storms were begun to be recorded by NOAA. So we're really looking at a very busy, a very active season, and Tropical Storm Isaias was a great example of how that could affect us in the Northeast, and certainly some of the more hurricane-prone states in the Southeast and Texas and so forth. So that's why we're here today, and we'll share a little bit more about kind of what you can expect on a Red Cross relief operation on the next slide. So what does the Red Cross do on these? I think most folks know that we respond to big storms, and you might see the Red Cross in the news. But what do we actually do? Our core mission when we're responding to these large natural disasters are to provide immediate life-sustaining services for folks who have been impacted. So that typically looks like emergency sheltering, providing meals through emergency feeding, the distribution of critical supplies like hygiene supplies, cleanup supplies, maybe bulk bottled water, things of that nature. And also services like health and disaster mental health services. So if folks lost prescriptions or eyeglasses because of the storm, we can help connect them with local resources or provide them some support in getting those things back. Or if folks really suffered through some serious trauma as a result of a disaster, we have mental health workers who can help provide that initial touch and sort of what we call psychological first aid before getting them connected to more definitive services through their recovery process. But it's really about, and it goes back to that mission statement that Erica went over in the beginning. It's alleviating human suffering in the face of disasters, and we do that through all sorts of ways. But we're really having to change how we do it because of COVID, because we have a lot of safety considerations, both for our clients, but also for our workforce, that we have to adjust things. So now we're not putting people at risk or increased risk for contracting COVID. So a lot of that looks like, instead of having these large shelters, which you kind of see a picture of a typical Red Cross shelter there in the middle with all the cots lined up next to each other, this year we're really focused on using non-congregate sheltering options, which typically means putting people in hotels, using things like university dormitories so we can keep households sort of isolated from one another and minimize contact and that threat of contracting COVID from folks. Now, that may not always be possible, especially if we have a really big storm. We might have to use our more traditional congregate sheltering, but in those cases, we'll have things like personal protective equipment on site for clients in our workforce, face masks, face shields, gowns. We'll have medical staff on site to screen folks as they're coming in, and we'll increase the distance between clients. So instead of those cots right next to each other, like you're seeing in that picture, we'll space the cots out further so folks are maintaining that social distancing as much as possible during these situations. And I think I see a question. If Mr. Bloom, did you have a question you wanted to bring up before we move on to our next slide?
I think maybe his hand might just be. Oh.
Yeah, just holding my chin in a very pensive fashion while considering your words.
All right. Very good. Fair enough. Thank you. So this hurricane season are really two priorities for recruitment and for building capacity within our workforce come down to two of our functions. The first is sheltering. So we need folks who are going to be willing to go out and either work at those non-congregate shelter locations, so things like hotels, university dormitories, or even potentially at congregate sheltering locations, so a more traditional gymnasium type shelter, still with those COVID considerations and safety considerations that we talked about. The second priority that we have is with our disaster health services. So as mentioned before, that's where we're connecting with folks who are affected by a disaster, helping get replace lost medication, lost durable medical equipment, and making referrals to other services, health-related services within their community. And if we go to the next slide, I think you'll see a little bit more about what it means to be a shelter worker with the Red Cross. And we're really fortunate to have John Kepler on the call with us. He's one of our very active volunteers based out of New Hampshire who has worked in this capacity before. And John, I'll turn it over to you if you'd like to share a little bit about your own experience with sheltering.
Sure, thanks, James. As James noted, my name is John Kepler. I live over in the southwest corner of New Hampshire, and I am the Regional Information and Planning Lead for the Northern New England region. However, I also hold, like many of us, a number of other activities and positions, including I'm a shelter supervisor and a casework supervisor. I've deployed let's see, I've been with the Red Cross since 2011, early 2011, and I've deployed a number of times to national and regional disasters, and several of those have been in sheltering. And although it's not my my lead occupation at this time, I find sheltering to be one of the more rewarding things you can do in the Red Cross. I mean, it really goes to the heart of who we are and what we do. We take people who have been faced with a disaster out of their ability to deal with, and we provide them with the basics they need to survive. So we give them a safe place to stay. We give them food. We work with them to solve problems and that sort of thing. And the appreciation you get from that interaction with clients is really, it's quite heartwarming in a lot of different ways. So I've been out. I think my first deployment was to Nashua, New Hampshire after a large snowstorm we had that took out a bunch of power and blocked roads. And we opened up a shelter, which is sort of our typical old style shelter in a high school gym. We had maybe 50 people there. I helped to set the shelter up. I helped to bring people in and register them. And then I seeked over to a sort of a role where I was dealing with the feeding and snack tables and making sure people had coffee, something to eat, fruit, that sort of thing, keeping track of inventory. This was really new for me. I was a pretty green volunteer at that point, but I was able to work with other people from the Keene team, which is my area, who had a lot of experience, and they made it a very easy thing for me to learn. So it was really good. I can't thank them enough for sort of bringing me into it that way. And by the time I was done with a week or 10 days of that, I had a pretty good idea what I was doing in terms of a shelter. And that is, you watch for problems, you look for people that look like they need help, you sit down and talk with them, you try to determine what they need and see if you can find a way to bring it to them. And you make them feel welcome in a situation that's not their own home. So I find it extremely enjoyable, oddly enough. My latest shelter deployment was, I believe, the picture that James showed you on the slide before, with the Red Cross worker standing there with the Red Cross blanket in front of a big gym full of cots. And that was down in the Florida Keys after Hurricane Irma came through. And a team of us went down, and we ended up opening the first shelter open on the Florida Keys after that came through and devastated that whole part of the world. We opened it in a small Christian school in Islamorada. And we sort of had to make it up as we went along. We found a place to open a shelter. We got permission to use it. We did the shelter inspection. We set it up. We got the materials in that we needed, all in the space of about, I'd say, 4 or 5 hours. By the time we got people in there, it was about 10:30 at night. And we all went to sleep on the floor on gym mats. I mean, the clients, actually, some of them had bedding, but the rest of us did not. And we ended up staying there as in the same shelter with them. We had our own room so we could get a little bit of removal. But we sat there, we made it up as we went along. We found food and cooked it for them, and we took care of their needs. And I mean, you make very close friends in a short period of time, both among the other staff and among the clients as well. So I could go on, but I think I won't. I just say that this is really, it's so central to what we do in the Red Cross that I think everyone who volunteers in Red Cross disaster services should know how to work in a shelter and should be part of a shelter team. And it's, as James has noted, this year in particular, it's a real need. We're going to need a lot of shelter people, and it's not hard to learn. It's rewarding to do, and I highly recommend it to everyone. And with that, James, back to you.
Very good. Well said, John. Thank you. If we go to our next slide, we'll talk about the second activity that we're really prioritizing this season, and that's, as we mentioned, our disaster health services activity. And again, we have Terry Jarvis on the call with us. She is our regional program lead for disaster health services for Northern New England. So Terry, I'll turn it to you, and you can speak a bit to your experience in that field.
Okay, thank you. As James says, I'm responsible for health services for Northern New England, which is Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. For health services, sheltering could be in a shelter. One of the deployments I did was to Salem, New Hampshire, when we had one of our infamous winter ice storms, and an elderly housing unit lost electricity, and they opened up a shelter because it was going to be gone for a couple of days. And from a health service point of view, we're bringing in individuals from elderly housing with all the usual medical issues, etc. But they were used to living alone in their own apartments. And it was a matter of doing some rapid assessments to determine, what are your needs going to be here in the shelter, and also trying to find enough electrical plugs that were on generators, because the shelter was running on a generator, and many of the clients that came in with medical equipment that needed electricity round the clock. I do have to say, when one client came in by ambulance, I kind of went, oh Lord, what have I gotten myself into? But it turned out that it was more expedient to have them come by ambulance than to have them come by car. I've also done virtual work, and there are times when here in New England we will have to open up shelters similar to what John was talking about in Nashua. We do have several areas in New England that just seem to like to flood every spring. So we'll open up small shelters, and shelter workers will be at the shelter, and sometimes due to distances, health services is available by phone 24/7. And we rotate the shifts, etc. I've also done several deployments. All of my deployments have been to California, most of them at Christmas time. Haven't figured that one out yet. I've been there for flooding. That my first deployment was for flooding, and I kind of got off on the bad foot because I got royally lost in California. I went over the Golden Gate Bridge 4 times in one morning, just give you an idea of how lost I was. And then when I did get to the shelter, English was not the primary language of most of the clients. So if any of you do speak other languages, those are very valuable assets in many of our shelters. The Spanish was the primary language, and I was kind of reverting to my high school Latin to try and understand what was being said. It worked out very well. A lot of it was case management, helping them replace missing medications, helping replace missing durable medical equipment, and an awful lot of just sitting down and listening. And that's not unique to DHS. All of the Red Cross workers that working in shelters, we spend a lot of our time just listening to the clients, because for so many of them, emotionally, they're having difficulty coping, and they just wanted to have somebody listen to them. I've worked with the Red Cross at several wildfires. The most recent one was the Camp Fire in 2018, where an entire town perished. And during that deployment, I was doing, really, it was a unique deployment. I was doing staff health. As mentioned earlier, there's always people there that take care of our own staff. And at one point, I was responsible for all of the Red Cross volunteers and employees that were in deployments in Chico for the Camp Fire. And things range from I'm having Charlie horses in my legs to I'm having difficulty breathing and my chest hurts. Everything that you see in a normal emergency department. We do not do long-term definitive care in any of our shelters for either our staff or for our clients. We assess, we do differential diagnoses, and then if necessary, we'll transport folks to the local emergency departments. Health services also works in what are called local assistance centers, which is the one in Chico was in an old Sears building that was no longer open, and it had representatives from every conceivable local, state, and federal organization there. And you could go there to find out how to get your birth certificate replaced, your marriage certificate, to get job counseling. And the Red Cross was there also, continuing to help clients replacing missing medications, missing hearing aids, the entire gamut of what was necessary. Because there were so many fatalities involved with that fire, the interdisciplinary care condolence team was active for a couple of months there. That's a team that works with the families or next of kin of individuals that have deceased as part of the disaster. And that's opportunities for people to join as they have gained more experience. I was working with a family with the daughter who had lost her father and her brother. we had mental health there, health services. And so those is a variety of the different things you can do. If you don't want to deploy because of COVID-19, there are an awful lot of opportunities for health professionals to provide services right here in northern New England. We take care of individuals who have lost their homes due to fire, working with families that might have suffered injuries due to the recent tropical storm going through. One thing you have to be in health services, and I think really any part of the Red Cross, is you have to be really flexible. You might leave Manchester Airport thinking that you're going to be working in the shelter in, say, Yuba City, and you arrive in Yuba City and they say, we have a higher need for you up here in Nightingale. So you have to be flexible. You could be in several different locations during the same couple of week deployment. During COVID-19, as James said, there are a lot of things that are different. Shelters have left people. Volunteers are trying to be housed in hotels, etc., in private rooms. In the usual situation, it's possible that you could end up sheltering in a school gymnasium gym, as John mentioned, with 50 of your new best friends. I have made a lot of friends during the deployments, and there are several of them that I still communicate with on a fairly regular basis. You'll meet people from all walks of life, and you'll really, as a health service professional, you're going to be thinking outside of the box. There's no nursing supervisor to call for backup. But I know that Eric will be putting contact information in the chat box later. So if you have questions, do feel free to contact me directly. James, back to you.
All right, thanks very much, Terry. So that's in a nutshell, what you can sort of expect working either in sheltering or in disaster health services. And if we go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about overall expectations that one should have going into a Red Cross disaster relief operation. And you can see a number of things listed there. A couple of the ones to highlight: we do typically ask for a 14-day commitment from folks if they're going to be deploying in person. So that's a 2-week period. Sometimes there are exceptions to that, but not typically. The typical assignment is 14 days. And as Terry said, the most important part with all of this is to be flexible. Remember that the nature of trying to manage a disaster is that there's going to be some chaos involved, especially while things are getting up and running and organized. So keep that in context, be flexible, understand that everyone on a relief operation is working toward the mission of alleviating human suffering. And sometimes that means that, as Terry mentioned, if you're deployed out to work at one location and get switched to another, that may very well happen. That's very common, especially in the early phases of a relief operation. A couple other things to note is that the Red Cross will cover all travel expenses. You'll arrange travel and flights if necessary through a travel agency that we work with. Those details will be provided at the time of your assignment by Red Cross personnel. And you would also be assigned what we call a mission card, which is essentially a debit card that's preloaded with funds to cover things like meals and other general expenses during your 2-week deployment. Typically, what we would do as far as lodging goes for our workforce is they either share rooms in a hotel or possibly in what we call a staff shelter, which is very similar to a client shelter, but it's where our workforce stays on deployment. Because of COVID, we are again taking very similar precautions with our workforce as we are with our clients. So we're not doing roommates. That means if the operation is doing hotel lodging, you may have your own room. It also means that you may still be in that staff shelter. One thing I'll note, and this was probably the most important lesson that I learned after my first couple of deployments, is that if you do go out, make sure you bring earplugs with you. If you're going to be in a staff shelter with 50 or 60 of your new best friends, it can get very loud at night. So I would recommend bringing earplugs so you can get rest and get a good night's sleep. So I think we can move on to the next slide, and we'll talk a little bit about other lines of service. Erica, I'll turn it to you.
Awesome. Thank you, James. So today, I want to ensure that you know we have a variety of different opportunities to volunteer with us. So if you find through this presentation that maybe the sheltering opportunity is not going to work for you, or your schedule, maybe you just don't have the flexibility right now to commit to a long-term or short-term deployment, we do have some other opportunities. And some of those opportunities are with our disaster services team. So we have local response teams called disaster action teams that need volunteers to help with local preparedness, response, and recovery in your home counties. So that's all throughout the region. We train individuals that are available to be on call. That way, in case there is an emergency like a home fire, flooding, we have volunteers that are prepared to go and offer client support. So that is one opportunity that we can talk more about. So if that's something that you're interested in, doing something home-based, more catered to your schedule and picking up shifts when you're available, then please reach out to myself and Paula. We will have our contact information put into the chat box. Actually, Tim will pop that in there for us right now. Send us an email. Let us know that you're interested, and we can help you go through that process and get you started. We also have opportunities with biomedical services. So these are our blood drives, helping collect those life-saving units of blood. And most often we are in search of blood donor ambassadors throughout our region. So those are our volunteers that are assisting with registration at the blood drives, making sure folks get checked in. Right now they have a new task to take temperatures of our blood donors to ensure that they are healthy when they're entering the drives to really limit that risk of COVID. And then also stocking our canteen and making sure that our donors are having a snack after they donate, that they're feeling well. So you can be a big part of that experience by becoming a blood donor ambassador. We have blood donor ambassador or blood volunteers that help also with scheduling, as well as onboarding and training our blood donor ambassadors and other blood services volunteers. So if you have a little bit more of a background when it comes to training services, we would love to have you join our team and put those skills to use. And then lastly, I'll mention that we also are always seeking departmental support. So if you have interest in or just experience in administration, we are always looking for folks to help our engagement team, our recruitment team, our development team, whether it's recruiting volunteers, logging donations, helping us plan recognition and appreciation events. We have volunteer roles within all of those aspects of the organization. So again, 90% of our workforce are volunteers. So if you have a special skill set that you want to bring to the organization, there's likely an opportunity here at the Red Cross. So again, I believe our contact information is in the chat box, so please reach out if you're interested in some of those other roles. And then on the next slide, we're just going to take a moment to talk about the road to volunteering. So walking away from today, what's your next steps? So you're here, which is wonderful. That's the first step. The next step, if you have not already, would be to apply as a Red Cross volunteer. So we have an online application that you can complete on the web or on a mobile app that you can download to your smartphone or your devices. And it has 5 main steps where you will create a Red Cross ID, creating an account with us, providing your personal information, telling us a little bit more about your interests, uploading a photo ID, and that's going to help us initiate a background check for you. So all of our Red Cross volunteers are vetted through a background check. It's a requirement that we have because we work with sensitive populations. So through that process, if you have any challenges, there is some support available to help with your application. So there is a number on our slides. I understand it's a little small, so Tim is also going to pop that into the chat box. But if you call 844-621-4243, that's our application assistance hotline. They can assist you with getting through that application process. If maybe you're struggling to upload your photo ID, because that can be a tricky step, they're there to support. So we don't want that to prevent you from becoming a Red Crosser with us. So that is the first step. If you are already a Red Cross volunteer, I will show the process for getting involved with that in just a moment. But you save a little bit of time because you're already in our system and just have to share your interest in the sheltering role. So we will talk about that. But again, if you have questions throughout, reaching out to Paula or myself with a call, email, or text anytime regarding volunteering, we're happy to help you with those questions. So let me just take a moment, Paula, if you don't mind. I'm just going to share my screen. I want to just show what the starting your application looks like. That way you know you're in the right spot when you go to apply and that you're clicking on the right positions. Because it can be, we have a lot of open positions, so I don't want you to get lost when you're looking. So this is our Red Cross, our National Red Cross website at redcross.org. And when you come to this page, you'll click on the volunteer tab. You will click on volunteer opportunities. And there's a couple of options here, but you can explore all of our volunteer opportunities or you can find my volunteer opportunity. Either one's going to take you to the same page. And once you're here, you have a few options, but you can search for opportunities, you can take a quiz that will ask you some information about what you're interested in, or you can browse our volunteer positions based on different categories, whether you want to be boots on the ground or virtual, behind the scenes. But today we're just going to search. And you'll see right off the bat, this is our Burlington zip code, but if you put in your zip code, you're going to see a lot of these roles pop up, especially our shelter service associate and shelter supervisor. But you can click on these roles to learn more about them, and you can click on apply now, which will take you to starting your volunteer application, which we won't get into, but we're happy to help you one-on-one if you need assistance with that. Also here, if you're interested specifically in health services because you have that licensure, if you just search health services, you'll see at the bottom here our disaster health services associate or disaster health services supervisor roles. Just jot those down if you have a notepad near you. That's what you're going to want to look for. If you're interested in either of those roles, click on them. You can read more about them and then you can apply. Pretty straightforward, but just wanted to make sure you didn't get lost within that. And then also I'll mention, can you confirm, Paula, can you just confirm you can see my volunteer connection profile?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. So this is, once you become a Red Crosser, part of that application process is creating a Red Cross ID, which is in turn creating a volunteer connection profile for you. And this is really the hub for all of our current volunteers. So if you're on the call and you're already a Red Crosser, you're very familiar with this. This is where you go to log your hours, find information about what's going on in the region, finding events like today's event. But you can also show and express interest in other volunteer opportunities. So there's the opportunities tab up here on your the options on your home screen. And if we click on that, we can search opportunities throughout the region. So here you can, just like with the external application, you can click on Service Associate if you're interested in this role, and you can apply for this position. It won't require you to reapply as a Red Cross volunteer since we already have all of your information, but it will forward that information to our screening team so we can get your application screened for the role and get you involved. So whether you're interested in the Service Associate role or the Health Services, this is where you would go to express that interest. And you can also let your supervisor know. They can help get you involved as well if you forget how to get here. And then after you've applied, the next step is a screening call with our volunteer services team. So your background check clears, and then our team will reach out to you. And we will be looking to just schedule a 15-minute call so we can talk to you about your interest, make sure that sheltering is something that you really want to do, or maybe you've come to us and you're interested in helping at our blood drives, helping with our disaster action teams. We will screen you for that role, make sure it's a good fit, and then we'll pass you to the department so that they can start training and onboarding you. And at that point in the process, you're going to the department, so I'm going to pass you off to James since he is within the disaster department.
Great, thanks, Erica. Yeah, so there's, once you're on board as a Red Cross volunteer, the next step is to start your training. And really, the training is nice because it's self-paced, and typically the entry-level trainings are all web-based. So once you're a Red Cross volunteer, you'll have access to our online training platform, where you'll be able to work with your supervisor, get assigned the training that you need for your specific interest, whether that's sheltering, health services, or something else, and then take those at your own pace. So if you're really motivated and you're looking to go out and potentially deploy in the next couple of days, you could get those trainings done maybe in one day. If you want to pace it out a little more, you could do it over the course of several weeks or even a couple months. It's really up to you and your schedule and motivation. Once you've got the required training, we assign what we call a GAP, a group, short for a group activity position. And that's basically a designation of what you're qualified to do on a Red Cross operation based on your training and based on your experience. So once you have that assignment, our deployment team will look for opportunities for you to go out and support a Red Cross relief operation based on a couple of things. First is your availability, right? So you've got to be available to go. And again, we look for that sort of 2-week window of commitment. The second piece is that we have to have a need. So there needs to be an established relief operation that's requesting more people in from across the country. Once those two things line up, you'll get a call from our deployment team, and they'll ask if you're ready to go or not. And that's when you say yes, hopefully, and the whole process starts. So you're out, you do your 2-week assignment, and now it's time to return home. And there is an out processing process, very similar to how you get a call from our Northern New England deployment team. When you're leaving an operation, you'll work with the staffing team there to out process and go through all the details of what you need to do to get home, from arranging travel to getting an evaluation from your supervisor, which is really important because we use those evaluations to promote people to higher supervisory levels within the Red Cross, to any COVID specific safety guidelines you need to be aware of. So depending on where you've traveled, there may be a self quarantine period upon returning home. Those are all kind of dictated by the states at this point. We may even arrange for COVID testing for you before you return home. So the out processing team will take care of that for you on the deployment and give you all those instructions for returning home. And then when you get home, obviously very often need some time to rest, decompress, and then stay engaged. We really want folks to stay engaged with work that's being done, not just on a national scale with a relief operation, but also locally as we prepare for these events and do our local responses and local preparedness programs.
Great, James. Thank you. And I guess we're now at a place where we're ready for questions. If you've been putting questions in the chat box, we have someone monitoring them that will bring them forward to us. Or if you have questions that you've saved, now's a good time to post them to us.
Also, feel free to come off mute and ask a question if you'd like.
Exactly.
I have a question.
Okay.
Actually, I see a question just popped into the chat. Tim, can you let us know what that question is?
Sure. It is, sorry, just have to move the box out of the way. How long are you looking your own hours? I can't really.
Yeah, sorry about that, Tim. I think that might be, how do you log your own hours?
Yeah, how do you log your own hours? There we go.
Yeah, I can take that one, Erica, if you like.
Sure.
So there's a couple ways to do it. We have a platform called Volunteer Connection, which again, once you're a Red Cross volunteer, that's how really our volunteer management system. You'll get access to it. You'll get a username, a password. And you can go in and it's very simple to either log your hours through a computer or even we have apps. If you have a smartphone, you can log hours through the Volunteer Connection app. For a deployment, if you're assigned to a national relief operation, you'll actually automatically be credited with those volunteer hours. I think the default, and if Ashley's on, she can correct me. I think it's 10 hours a day. You get 10 volunteer hours a day you get credited for a national relief operation. So that will happen automatically and you won't have to worry about that while you're on a deployment. But for local projects, local assignments, volunteers are able to log their own hours.
Great, thank you. Other questions? Andrew, I think I saw you poise yourself for a question. Am I right?
Yeah, I put it in the chat.
Oh, okay, great.
Would you like me to read it? I have no problem reading it.
Sure, go for it.
All right, yeah. So you asked, so you schedule which 2 weeks are available as opposed to being called when needed. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, that's about it. So again, when you're in our system and have access to Volunteer Connection, you'll be able to post and give a date range of your availability. So if you're available for maybe a couple months, you can just put that full date range in Volunteer Connection. That way we know when opportunities come up, a deployment team can call you. But it is important to keep that availability up to date because when we're looking to recruit people, those folks who have current availability will get the first call. Sometimes if there's a really, really urgent need, we may call down people who don't have availability posted, but it's always those folks who have the current availability get the first call. And sometimes opportunities fill up really quick, a matter of hours. So if you're really looking to get out the door, that's the best way to do it.
We also have a question. How do I volunteer off-site? Say in my case, I'm in a different country.
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a couple things. So first, if you're referring to potentially international relief operations, that's a whole different sort of set of processes and programs and infrastructure. The American Red Cross does sometimes support international relief operations, but it's a much smaller roster of very highly qualified international responders who are able to go out and do that. There are, however, and this is something we're moving a lot more toward right now, is virtual deployment opportunities. So more and more we're trying to find ways to engage volunteers remotely to support relief operations. So you could work, in theory, from your home, supporting a relief operation maybe in Florida or Texas. It depends on the role and what the need is. I'll give you an example. We have currently from Northern New England, we have 5 members of our workforce that are deployed virtually supporting southeastern Pennsylvania after they got hit by Tropical Storm Isaias. So they're all working from home, folks from Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, but they're supporting that operation out of southeastern Pennsylvania. So it really depends on what the need is and what you're qualified to do. But that's something that once you're on board, have that conversation with your supervisor so we can get you on the right training track to do that.
And I would also add, if you are resident in a foreign country, a country other than the United States, the Red Cross is an international organization. So you would be able to look online and find the Red Cross or the Red Crescent wherever you are. So if that's a better alternative for you, that's something to consider too. Other questions or wonderments?
I have a question, Paula.
Sure.
So say I'm being deployed, how much do I need to budget? Am I going to have to purchase my own food, travel? How does that work? Do we need to plan for any costs out of pocket?
James, do you want to take that?
Sure. Yep. So all those costs will be covered for you. Some will be covered directly by the organization, such as travel and airfare. That'll just happen through our travel agency, and they'll make all those arrangements. You'll just be provided a phone number to call and work through the details of where you want to fly out of and time and all that. For other expenses, day-to-day expenses, you'll be assigned a mission card which is basically just a debit card preloaded with cash. And you'll have that to cover food and other just expenses throughout your deployment. Lodging is also typically covered. Well, it's always covered, but depending on what lodging you have, whether it's hotel or staff shelter, the operation will take care of those costs directly as well. So you really don't have to worry about lodging costs. And you'll be provided that mission card to cover other day-to-day expenses. If you run out of money, what's initially loaded on that mission card, there is a process to request additional funds. So it's not just you're out and you've got to cover up things out of pocket. You can request additional funds if necessary.
Awesome.
Really,
Thank you, James.
yeah, we really want this experience to be of no cost to you because you're giving your all to others.
I do see a hand raised. Is that an old hand that's still up?
Not sure.
We also have a question.
If you're talking about me, I had a question. I'm working on obtaining my CRSW, so I'm looking for volunteer opportunities that would be helpful in that area. Do you guys have anything like that? Have you had people volunteer with you that were working towards their CRSW?
Terry, are you able to speak to that at all?
Could she repeat the question, because for some reason the sound is cutting in and out on my computer.
Yes, I'm working on obtaining my CRSW, and so I was wondering if you had volunteer opportunities that would be in that area, or if you've ever had anybody going for their CRSW that have volunteered for you.
And I think you said you're working on your MSW. Is that correct?
Oh, CRSW, Certified Recovery Support Worker.
Okay. I am completely unfamiliar with that role. It does not appear on the list of health service positions that are acceptable for the health service. However, I have found that there is always a place in the Red Cross for every single volunteer. What I would suggest you do is that perhaps you do the application, and when you talk with the person that calls to interview, you describe that role even more so that they'll have a better understanding as to what your background is. And like I say, I've never seen anybody not find a home in the Red Cross that wanted one.
Rebecca, my name is Eric. I oversee the volunteer program. There may not be a direct correlation from exactly what you're trying to get certified in, but there are transferable skills with what you're studying with some of the work we do, particularly around some of our casework for those that have been affected by fires and so on. It involves interviewing skills, helping them to come up with short and medium range plans and things like that. So just to echo what Terry was saying, that there are some positions that probably would align pretty closely with the skill set that you're working toward, if not the actual direct work itself.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Rebecca. Is there a question in the chat box too?
Yes, there is. A person asked, I am allergic to nuts. Probably could apply to any allergy. How much of a problem would this be on deployment?
Yeah, it's a good question. Terry, do you want to address that from the staff health perspective?
Yes. Where you're allergic to nuts, we would put the burden on you as the volunteer to, as you're going through getting your food at different meals, asking the mass care staff involved with feeding, are there nuts in here? We do not restrict our clients from eating nuts within a shelter. At least I've never seen that yet. I would be concerned about the degree of allergy from a staff health point of view. If just the smell of nuts gives you an anaphylactic reaction, that's a whole big difference than if eating nuts causes you a reaction. I'd be happy to talk with you, offline or get into more depth. Our belief is that all of our volunteers are adults, and You know what would trigger your allergies. Special meals are usually not available. It's more of a matter of, for somebody who is a vegetarian, it's a matter of they would just pick what they would eat that would be within their diet. But I'd like to know more about what type of reaction you have to nuts and what what stimulates the anaphylaxis.
Yeah. And just to add really quickly a couple points to that, it's not a disqualifying factor, as Terry said. That's not going to disqualify you from going out and deploying. There is a part of the deployment process where you'll go through an initial health screening. And that's where a health services worker like Terry will just ask a few very basic questions and determine if there are any what we call hardship codes associated with the relief operation that might, people might want to consider based on their own health status. In some cases, if we have operations that are really challenging, we've had operations in Saipan, Puerto Rico, where there are really austere environments, and it can be really challenging, especially early on in an operation, to accommodate special diets and things like that. Again, not necessarily disqualifying factors, but just things that the responder needs to consider and prepare for if they're going to go out into those environments.
Great, thank you. Any last questions? I see we're almost at our last moment of time together. Any burning question for now? What I would say is, let me show you the next slide, which is a thank you, and we so appreciate your joining us. And then information about Erica and myself. We hope, and also applying. We hope that we've really tempted you to apply. If you have lingering questions or you wonder about aspects of it that we weren't able to cover in detail together right now, please do reach out to Erica or myself. We'd be happy to hear from you. We are eager to help people become volunteers with the Red Cross and answer any questions that we can. So without any more, is there any last question we should cover, or is that a wrap for today?
Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you, everyone. We really appreciated your coming. I'll leave this slide up for a couple of moments, but I think we're officially complete here, and we really do appreciate the time you spent with us. Thank you.
Take care, folks.
Another great job, Paula, Erica, and James.
Yeah, thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
Hey,
You too.
Hopefully the dentist went well.
Slide, the white text on the bottom for Volunteer Northern New England, redcross.org, and the end of the redcross.org Volunteer Today link is pretty hard for me to see on my computer in white.
Interesting.
You might want to change that to blue text like the rest of it.
Yeah, I'm wondering how that happened.
Yeah.
I don't think it was supposed to be white, but yeah, we'll definitely fix that. Thank you, John.
No problem.
Oops,
Just
I lost
button
the slides again. All right. I think that's a wrap.
Cool.
It'd be interesting to see if we get any volunteers out of the two programs.
Yes, fingers
It sure
crossed.
will.
I'm hoping so.
Yep.
Indeed.
I hope so. Have a good afternoon.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank
Bye
you.
now. Thank you so much, Terry. I see a few lingerers. Anybody have a question that's burning they don't want to give up?
They might have also stepped away, but
Right, possible.
I do
That's
have
great.
Tim waiting on the line to chat with me. We were just gonna hold this meeting unless folks don't hop off. Well, we can start a new one.
Yeah, it's all right. Whatever works.
Yeah.
Tim, thank you so much for your help. I really appreciated your reading the questions for us. That was awesome.
Of course,
Especially
anytime.
the tricky spelling. That was
Yeah,
a good.
especially the tricky
Oh,
ones.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. No worries.
I didn't want to have to read it, Tim, so I let you do it.
Well, there we go. There's the intern.
Let the intern do it. He's
Right,
awesome.
that's all right. That works for me.
I think, Tim, I'll send you a link in just a moment, and we can pick up on a new meeting.
Okay, sounds good. Whatever works. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, Paula. Nice
You
work.
bet. Thanks.